Okay, tonight's extension lesson goes with this worksheet, Lesson 4, Slope-Intercept Form. So I'd like you to get this worksheet out and take notes along with me. Slope-intercept form is just a form of a linear equation that looks like this. Y equals mx plus b. And when we say a linear equation, that means that if a line looked like this, or an equation looked like this, when we graphed it, it would form a straight line. Okay? So for example, y equals 2x plus 9 would be considered in slope-intercept form because it's solved for y. Y is all by itself on one side of the equal sign, and there's a value that's being multiplied, a coefficient in front of x, and there's a constant that's being added or subtracted at the end. So this is slope-intercept form. Now, in 7th grade pre-algebra, we haven't touched on this at all, but we have seen things that were just in y equals mx form. We saw lots of equations that looked like this. Y equals 2x. Y equals 5.5x. And hopefully you recall that what you learned about an equation that was in this form is that it was direct variation. It was a line that, when graphed, went through the origin and had a constant rate of change that was equal to whatever this coefficient was. So in the case of y equals 2x, that would mean we had a line that went through the origin and the slope, or the rate of change, was 2, which means that you rise 2, you run 1. You rise 2, you run 1. And that defined the slant of this line. Okay, so we learned y equals mx, but now we're going to see what happens to the line if we add some number at the end, some constant. Okay? Well, what we're going to see is that if an equation is in slope-intercept form, the name of it tells us the two things that were given. The slope is going to be the m value. And the intercept, in this case, that means the y-intercept, is the b value. So the y-intercept. So what that means when you talk about a y-intercept is where does the graph cross the y-axis. So if you look back to this example, it would make sense that in slope-intercept form, this equation, y equals 2x plus 0, means our y-intercept is 0. So as you can see, this graph crosses the y-axis right at 0, which is the origin, and it has a slope of 2. Okay? If we had an equation that looked like this, that would hit the y-axis at 0, and it would be slanting downward at a rate of negative 1/3. That means we go down 1 and over 3. So that line would be pretty flat, and it would be going downward like this. Okay? So now we're going to put this together into more complicated equations. So the first thing is you just need to get used to finding what the slope and the y-intercept are in this form. So if you look at number 1, y equals 4x plus 1, you want to ask yourself, is it in slope-intercept form? Does it look like y equals something times x plus something else? And if it is, we're going to then identify that our slope is 4 and our y-intercept is 1. Okay? Alright, so in just a minute I'll have you pause the video and I'd like you to try 1 through 6. But I'd like to take a little side note to something like number 3. Is number 3 in slope-intercept form? Well, slope-intercept form needs to look like this. And as you can see, this equation is not solved for y. So I want you to think about what we did in class just the other day. We had things like this. 9 plus y equals 4. And we learned to solve for y by getting rid of this thing, we would subtract 9 from both sides. Well, to solve this for y, we're going to do the same concept, only this time we have to get rid of negative x. So what do we have to do to cancel negative x? Well, we're going to add x. And remember, what you do to one side of an equation, you have to do to the other to keep it balanced. And just like before, we want to circle these to make sure that they're opposites. And those are going to cancel. And we get y equals 4 plus x. Now remember from last unit, the expression 4 plus x cannot be simplified because these are not like terms. So we now have it in slope-intercept form. So in this case, our slope, our m value, is going to be the coefficient of x. So our slope is 1, and our y-intercept is 4. Okay, so I'd like you to go through 1 through 6. Number 5, you're going to have to do some rearranging to get the slope-intercept. And then start the video again when you're done with that. Okay, let's take a look at number 7. So now that you've recognized an equation if it's in y equals mx plus b form, we know that the slope is -2 and the y-intercept is 2. Now we want to translate that to the graph. So what you're going to do is the easiest point to find is the y-intercept. So we're going to go on our y-axis up to 2 and we're going to put a dot because our line goes through the y-axis right at that point. Then from this point we're going to calculate a slope of -2. Well, remember, slope is rise over run. So if our slope is -2, that means that we are rising -2 and we're running 1. And we're always going to run to the right. So if you look at this point, to rise -2 means we go down 2 and we run to the right 1. And keep doing that. Down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1. You should notice that these fall into a straight line pattern. And we've got enough points to use a straight edge to connect the dots. And there's our linear equation. Okay? So number 8, you're going to have to do some rearranging. You have to solve for y first, and then you're going to graph it. And then number 9, I'll do with you. To solve for y, we have to get rid of this -2/3 x. So I'm going to add 2/3 x to both sides. So these are going to cancel, and we're left with y equals 2/3 x plus 1. So to graph that, we go to 1, which is the y-intercept, on the y-axis, and then we do our slope of 2/3, which means we rise 2, we run 3. You really only need 2 lines, or 2 points to define a line, and you connect those, and you're good to go. Okay? Alright, so what I'd like you to do is, for tonight, I'd like you to try to complete this page, and then tomorrow in class we'll do some additional practice time on this. Thanks, and have a good night.